When an empath stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth, Carl Jung discovered something remarkable happens. They don't become selfish, they become dangerous, not to others, but to every system that profits from their endless giving. Jung called this transformation individuation, and it's the most threatening thing an empath can achieve in a world built on their self-sacrifice. Picture the moment everything changes. You're sitting alone, maybe after another exhausting day of managing everyone else's emotions. You've said yes when you meant no. You've smiled through your pain to keep others comfortable. You've absorbed their stress until your nervous system feels like it's on fire. But something different happens this time. Instead of pushing through, you pause. You ask a question that changes everything. What if I stopped? That question is what Jung called the beginning of consciousness. And for the empath who dares to answer it honestly, there's no going back to ignorance. But here's what Jung discovered that no one talks about. The empath's gift of feeling everything isn't actually a gift at all. It's what I call survival sensitivity, a trauma response disguised as compassion. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his practice. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But empaths can't become who they truly are because they've never learned who they are without others' emotions." Let me tell you what really happens in that first moment of awakening. The empath doesn't gradually become more self-aware. They experience what Jung called the collision with the unconscious, a sudden, shocking recognition that their entire identity is built on a lie. The lie that they are responsible for everyone else's feelings. Jung documented this exact pattern in his work on individuation. He found that highly sensitive people often develop what he called inflated compassion. They become addicted to being needed because it's the only way they learn to feel valuable. But when this bubble bursts, something extraordinary happens. The real self begins to emerge. This is where Jung's work becomes revolutionary for empaths. He discovered that every person carries what he called the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we've rejected or hidden. But for empaths, the shadow contains something others don't expect: rage. Pure, undiluted rage at being used, manipulated, and taken for granted. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, this darkness isn't evil. It's their suppressed anger, their denied needs, their silenced voice. And when they finally meet this shadow, everything shifts. The empath who discovers their shadow doesn't become cruel. They become what I call consciously selective. They start seeing manipulation tactics that were invisible before. They recognize emotional vampires. They spot the difference between genuine need and manufactured crisis. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Jung identified specific patterns when highly sensitive people begin individuation, what I call the 8 signs of conscious awakening, and if you recognize these in yourself, you're experiencing what Jung called the birth of psychological sovereignty. Sign 1. The energy shift. The first sign is what I call the energy reversal. Instead of your energy flowing outward to everyone else, it starts pooling back toward you. Jung observed this in his patients. When people stop unconsciously giving their life force away, they suddenly have energy for themselves. You stop feeling drained after social interactions. You stop absorbing everyone's bad moods. Most importantly, you stop feeling guilty about having boundaries. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." If you've been told you're too sensitive, comment below, "My sensitivity is my strength." But here's what's truly remarkable. Others notice this shift before you do. They sense that you're no longer available to be their emotional dumping ground, and some will try to guilt you back into your old role. Sign 2. The mask falls away. Jung called it the death of the persona, the social mask we wear to fit in. For empaths, This persona is usually the nice one, the helpful one, the one who never says no. But when individuation begins, this mask becomes impossible to maintain. You start saying what you actually think instead of what people want to hear. You express preferences instead of always deferring to others. You admit when you're tired instead of pretending to have endless energy. This terrifies people who benefited from your self-erasure. Jung warned about this phase. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But for the awakening empath, self-acceptance becomes more important than social acceptance. Sign 3. The projection returns. This is where Jung's understanding becomes crucial. He discovered that we often project our own qualities onto others. Empaths project their sensitivity, their depth, their capacity for genuine care onto people who don't actually possess these qualities. But during individuation, what I call the projection recall happens. You stop seeing potential in people and start seeing reality. You stop making excuses for bad behavior. You stop believing that everyone is just misunderstood deep down. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The awakening empath realizes they were irritated by selfishness because they had suppressed their own healthy selfishness for so long. Sign 4. Boundaries become sacred. Jung observed that individuals who achieve psychological maturity develop what he called a personal relationship with the unconscious. For empaths, this means they finally start listening to their internal signals instead of external demands. You begin saying no without elaborate explanations. You stop feeling guilty for having needs. You recognize that people who get angry at your boundaries were benefiting from your lack of them. This isn't selfishness. Jung called it individual integrity. The awakening empath discovers what I call sacred selfishness. The understanding that taking care of yourself isn't just okay, it's necessary for authentic relationship with others. Sign 5. The guilt disappears. This might be the most shocking sign for empaths. The crushing guilt they've carried for having needs, taking space, or disappointing others begins to evaporate. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop feeling guilty for being human. You realize that guilt was often your response to other people's manipulation tactics. When someone says, "You've changed," in a disappointed tone, instead of rushing to reassure them, you think, "Yes, I have, and that's the point." Jung wrote, "The individual has always been unconscious of himself and has remained so. But the awakening empath becomes conscious of their own worth, independent of others' opinions." Sign 6. Authenticity over approval. Jung's individuation process leads to what he called self-actualization, living from your authentic core rather than from external expectations. For empaths, this means choosing authenticity over approval, even when it costs relationship. You stop performing emotions you don't feel. You stop pretending to agree when you don't. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny just to make others comfortable. This authenticity is magnetic to some people and threatening to others. Comment if people started treating you differently when you found your backbone. They sensed the change before I announced it. The awakening empath learns what I call authentic magnetism. When you stop trying to be liked by everyone, you become genuinely attractive to the right people. Sign 7. The healer heals themselves. Jung discovered that many healers are what he called wounded healers. They help others to avoid their own pain. But during individuation, empaths turn their healing gifts inward for the first time. You start asking, "What do I need?" instead of, "What does everyone else need?" You begin nurturing your own inner child instead of parenting every adult around you. You recognize that you can't give from an empty cup, and you've been empty for years. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The awakening empath finally gives themselves permission to discover who that is, separate from their role as everyone's emotional caretaker. Sign 8. conscious connection. The final sign is what Jung called conscious relationship, the ability to connect with others without losing yourself. The awakening empath develops what I call boundaried compassion. They can feel for others without taking on their emotions. You start attracting people who respect your boundaries instead of those who exploit your kindness. You develop relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. You love others without needing to save them. If you've reached the point where you can read people but no longer need their approval, right, I see you, but I don't need you. Jung observed that individuation leads to deeper, more authentic connections because you're finally relating as your true self, not your performing self. But Jung didn't romanticize this process. He called it the night sea journey, a period of disorientation and loss that's necessary for rebirth. For empaths, this phase feels like death, because in many ways, it is. It's the death of the false self that was built around pleasing others. You might lose friends who only liked the version of you that served them. You might feel lonely as you learn to be alone with yourself for the first time. You might grieve the relationships that were never really based on love, but on your usefulness. Jung wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The awakening empath must descend into their own psychological underworld before they can rise into authentic selfhood. Jung was one of the first psychologists to recognize the connection between mind and body. For empaths, years of absorbing others' emotions creates what I call energetic toxicity, chronic fatigue, anxiety, digestive issues, and autoimmune problems. But when empaths stop people-pleasing, their bodies begin to heal. The nervous system finally relaxes, sleep improves, chronic pain often diminishes. Jung understood that psychological healing and physical healing are inseparable. Your body was never meant to process everyone else's emotional waste. When you stop being the world's emotional landfill, your health naturally begins to restore. Jung observed that individuation always changes relationships. Some deepen, others fall away. For empaths, this sorting process can be painful but necessary. What I call the great relationship purge separates authentic connections from exploitative ones. People who truly love you will adapt to your boundaries and celebrate your growth. Those who resist your changes were probably benefiting from your self-neglect. Jung called this the differentiation between genuine love and neurotic attachment. You'll discover that many relationships were built on an unconscious contract. You provide endless emotional support. They provide conditional acceptance. When you break this contract by claiming your own life, some people will leave. Let them. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. When empaths stop being everyone's emotional sponge, they don't lose their sensitivity. They develop what I call conscious sensitivity. They can still feel deeply, but they choose what to absorb and what to release. This conscious sensitivity becomes a superpower. You can read situations accurately without being overwhelmed by them. You can help others without depleting yourself. You can love deeply without losing yourself. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, the ability to maintain your center while connecting with others. The awakening empath becomes what Jung called a conscious individual, someone who can navigate the world with their sensitivity intact, but their boundaries strong. Jung believed that individual transformation creates collective change. When one person becomes conscious, it gives others permission to do the same. The empath who stops people-pleasing doesn't just change their own life. They model a different way of being for everyone around them. Your courage to set boundaries gives others courage to set theirs. Your refusal to absorb everyone's emotions shows them they can be responsible for their own feelings. Your authentic self-expression reminds them they don't have to perform to be loved. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But this only happens when at least one person shows up authentically. Jung identified specific principles that guide individuated people, what I call the conscious empath's code, 5 principles that maintain psychological sovereignty while remaining connected to others. First, feel everything, absorb nothing. Your emotions are yours, their emotions are theirs. Second, give from overflow, never from depletion. Third, love others without losing yourself. Fourth, help when inspired, not when guilty. Fifth, trust your inner knowing over external pressure. These aren't rules. They're guidelines for maintaining what Jung called authentic being in a world that profits from your unconsciousness. Jung understood that society labels individual consciousness as selfish because unconscious people benefit from others' self-neglect. When empaths start prioritizing their own needs, they're often accused of becoming cold or uncaring. But Jung made a crucial distinction. There's healthy selfishness and unhealthy selfishness. Healthy selfishness means taking responsibility for your own happiness instead of making others responsible for it. It means having boundaries instead of walls. It means self-care instead of self-abandonment. The awakening empath learns that taking care of themselves isn't selfish, it's essential. You can't pour from an empty cup, and most empaths have been running on empty for years. Jung's concept of individuation includes what he called the inner marriage, the integration of masculine and feminine psychological principles within one person. For empaths, this means balancing their natural receptivity with healthy assertiveness. You learn to receive energy as well as give it. You develop the ability to say no as well as yes. You integrate your nurturing nature with your need for independence. Jung called this psychological wholeness, when you no longer need someone else to complete you, because you've learned to complete yourself. The awakening empath discovers they can be both soft and strong, both caring and boundaried, both sensitive and sovereign. Jung recognized that highly sensitive people have unique gifts when they learn to manage their sensitivity consciously. What I call the empath's arsenal, abilities that emerge when sensitivity is channeled rather than suppressed. Intuitive accuracy becomes razor sharp when you're not clouded by others' emotions. Creative expression flows when your energy isn't drained by emotional vampires. Deep, meaningful relationships form when you attract people who match your authenticity rather than exploit your kindness. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart." The conscious empath develops vision that cuts through pretense to see truth. Jung observed that individuation often involves a period of loneliness as you separate from unconscious group dynamics. For empaths, this loneliness can be intense. You've spent your whole life surrounded by people who needed you, and now you're learning to be alone. But Jung distinguished between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from others. Solitude is the joy of being connected to yourself. The awakening empath learns to enjoy their own company for the first time. In solitude, you hear your own thoughts without the noise of others' emotions. You discover your own preferences without the pressure of others' expectations. You meet yourself, perhaps for the first time. Jung's individuation process doesn't end with withdrawal from the world. It leads to conscious re-engagement. The awakening empath returns to relationships and community, but from a place of choice rather than compulsion. You help others when it feels authentic, not when you feel guilty. You engage in social situations when you want connection, not when you fear rejection. You give your gifts to the world from abundance, not from the desperate need to be needed. Jung called this conscious participation, engaging with life as your true self rather than your performing self. Jung understood that psychological development isn't linear. It happens in cycles. The awakening empath will face ongoing challenges as they maintain their boundaries and authentic self-expression. There will be moments of doubt, times when the old patterns call you back. But each cycle deepens your understanding. Each challenge strengthens your resolve. Each boundary you maintain makes the next one easier. Jung called this spiral development. You revisit similar themes at deeper levels of consciousness. The key is recognizing these cycles as part of growth, not evidence of failure. Jung believed that individuation creates responsibility. When you heal yourself, you naturally want to help others heal. But the conscious empath's mission looks different from their old people-pleasing patterns. Instead of rescuing people, you model healthy boundaries. Instead of absorbing their pain, you hold space for their growth. Instead of fixing their problems, you trust their ability to find their own solutions. This is what Jung called authentic service, helping from wholeness rather than woundedness. You become a lighthouse, providing illumination for those ready to see, but not chasing ships in the dark. Jung's ultimate goal was what he called the self, not the ego or the persona, but the integrated totality of who you are. For empaths, reaching this integration means embracing all aspects of themselves, the sensitive and the strong, the caring and the fierce, the giver and the receiver. You no longer apologize for feeling deeply. You don't suppress your intuitive gifts. You embrace your complexity rather than trying to fit into simple categories. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The integrated empath is both powerful and gentle, both open and boundaried, both connected and sovereign. So here's what I want you to understand. Your sensitivity is not your weakness, it's your strength. Your boundaries are not selfishness, they're self-respect. Your authenticity is not too much, it's exactly right. Jung spent his life studying the process of becoming whole, and he found that it always requires courage. The courage to disappoint others to stay true to yourself. The courage to be alone rather than betray your values. The courage to choose growth over comfort. If you recognize yourself in these 8 signs, you're already on the path Jung mapped out over a century ago. Trust the process. Trust your instincts. Trust that becoming who you truly are is not just your right, it's your responsibility. If you recognize yourself in these transformation patterns, write this: "My breaking point became my breakthrough." When an empath stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth, they don't become selfish. They become sovereign. They don't lose their compassion. They learn to include themselves in it. They don't stop caring about others. They start caring about themselves too. This is Jung's gift to every empath who's tired of being everyone's emotional caretaker. You don't have to carry the world's pain to prove you're good. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to deserve love. You can be sensitive and strong, caring and boundaried, empathic and authentic. The world doesn't need more depleted empaths. It needs conscious ones. Empaths who give from choice, not compulsion. Who help from abundance, not emptiness. Who love others without abandoning themselves. If you want to understand more about Jung's psychology of the sovereign individual, check out my video on Why the Man Who Needs Nothing is Society's Greatest Threat, where I explore how psychological independence threatens systems built on human dependency. Your journey from people-pleaser to conscious empath isn't just personal transformation, it's revolutionary, and Jung would be proud. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.